Where were we? Jesus just, so we just finished essentially first 12 verses? First 12 verses. All about Jesus gives and heals a paralyzed knee. Whole segment right here. That's what we just did. Let's keep going. So this little comic book illustration over here does not cover every verse, obviously. Be able to. So I'd keep going, and the next part, essentially, it looks like it's chapter 4 there. So we're not going to be able to use this again until chapter 4, but still a great piece. Jump into the next thing. We'll go through a couple more chapters. I don't even have pictures to work with. Kind of sad. Yeah. All right. Jesus calls Levi and eats with sinners. Levi is essentially Matthew, one of the disciples. Has a whole book, the whole gospel. The very first one, actually, in the New Testament, Matthew. I hit the chapters here, you see Matthew. Mark is right after Matthew, followed by Luke and John, which are four primary gospels of the New Testament that outline kind of Jesus' life for our central focus. So let's start right here.
Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but those who are ill. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners."
Yeah. Pause right there. I'm going to go through that set of verses, 13 through 17. Talking, making me cough. What's going on there? So, we have Jesus outside of town, essentially. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. And so I'm up here on verse 13. Up here. Right. Area, right. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi. So it's interesting that the first thing they call out there, essentially, what we see is Jesus is in Capernaum, where he heals this paralyzed man. And then we jump straight to verse 13, where once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. So he went out of town, essentially. And a large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. So Jesus outside of town, the whole crowd, assuming, probably followed him or started gathering when folks recognized him, and he started to teach them. And then it immediately in verse 14, as he walked along, so we've got him. It just goes to show sometimes the Bible can be hard to follow. You don't really try to take a minute and understand the verses and understand the holistic story of what Mark is trying to portray about Jesus here. So we see in a verse, I believe it's in the book of John, it talks about just the sheer amount of things that Jesus does. There's not enough books to record them. And this really does sort of emphasize that. He was always doing something, always performing miracles. He was always teaching. He was there for people. And we just don't, we get just but a glimpse of it in the Gospels. So why do we have verse 13? Tells basically he left town, went out by the lake. A large crowd came to them, and he began to teach them. And then we immediately in verse 14, as he walked along, went out, big crowd gathered, he taught, he started walking again, started moving again. Interesting. That's all I can say. I'm not a pastor. I've said that many times, so I don't really know what that's truly trying to visualize for us, other than was always doing something for the people. That's really what it's getting at. Even hidden, that very quick little set of verses there that most would just skip over. To show more about what Jesus was and about who he was. The fact that he was just always doing something for people. Let's keep going. As he walked along, he saw Levi sitting at the tax collector's booth. So at this point, he's obviously back in town. Unless the tax collector's booth was outside of town. It's possible. It's not very secure, I would think, if it was outside of town, considering they are collecting money. I would visualize a tax collector's booth as being in town and also surrounded by Roman guards. So, for safety, because it is the Roman money after all, their tax money. So that's what I would envision. We've got this, I'm going to jump down here. Let's draw this out. So we've got this tax collector booth here. Not allowed to make fun of my drawing. Window here. Ignore the funny line that came out of nowhere. Got. You get the idea. That's terrible. And then you got all the guards and whatnot out here. All right, we're just gonna erase that. We're gonna pretend that never happened. We'll go back up here to the stuff that actually know what they're doing. I'm not gonna pretend to draw. That is embarrassing. So just envision it with me. Jesus basically going back in town, walking by the tax collector booth, which is likely surrounded by Roman guards, along with a long line of people probably there to pay their taxes, who in all likely are not in a very good mood because no one likes to pay taxes, especially in this time when they were paying them to the Roman government, which a lot of people didn't like the Roman government. So it's you kind of got that scenario building up around the situation here, and you almost have to have that scenario. You almost have to have the situation and understand the situation before it even really draws to the power of Jesus and what he is about to do in these verses. So again, in verse 14, he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. He says two words: follow me. I'm gonna pause there for a second. Think about that. Digest. We got Levi, or Matthew, same person, who's a tax collector, who's definitely not liked by the people because he is a tax collector, sitting there doing his job. Probably likes his job, probably makes good money as a tax collector. And Jesus walks by, looks over to him and says, "Hey, follow me." We could probably take a guess that perhaps given the couple verses prior to that where Jesus is teaching a bunch of people, the crowd came to him, maybe some of those folks were following Jesus, maybe not. Maybe it was just his the couple disciples he's called to this point were with him, and that was it. Either way, there's something that would have drawn, in this case, Levi's attention to him. And this random man looks over to you and says, "Follow me." I kind of imagine that you're sitting at work one day, doing your job, probably in a job you like, a job that you're making a lot of money. Life's good, really no complaints. Random guy walks by, says, "Follow me." Said two words: follow me. Sitting here thinking in my head, yeah, no. Crazy man, move along. You know what I mean? Hey, come on. I'm not the only one here. You're with me. I know you are. On some level, you're with me. I'm not the only little crazy person out here. That's not what Levi did. As we see here in the end of verse 14. We're still in verse 14. Jesus says, "Follow me." Levi got up and followed him. So those last 5 words right there. terrible arrow to point them out. Actually, the arrow was in the wrong spot. Really, really powerful. So we strive to answer this question of who is Jesus. We strive to figure out and learn things about Jesus that we didn't already know. Maybe we don't know Jesus at all. At which point, hey, you're in the right place. You're listening to one crazy man talk about Jesus based on the life that I've had, that Jesus has changed. So you're in the right spot. For those of us that do know Jesus, we're seeking to learn more about Jesus, and we're making breakneck speed here through the book of Mark. We're on chapter 2, verse 14, after probably 10 hours of streaming on this. But this is why. All of it down to this one spot is the exact reason we do this, and the exact reason we ask this question of who is Jesus, because this really frames it up in a way that is just astounding. You got Jesus saying, "Follow me," to someone he's never met. And not only does Levi follow him, he gets up and follows him. Quits his job, leaves it all, follows him. I don't know how else to frame that up. It's a testament to what it must have been like to be in Jesus' presence. I can't imagine. There had to be something. There had to be something that just hit you when he spoke to you, that you knew without a shadow of a doubt who he was, and was like, yes, I will give up everything and do what you say. Truly, truly unique perspective. Not a unique perspective, that is the perspective of what Jesus was and who he was, based on the actual scripture that we see. So, really, really awesome. Let's keep going through this. So in verse 15, while Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, so essentially, follow me, and we're going to go have dinner at your house, because how else do people connect? We eat. We're human. We eat. So we do. But this really frames up the next part of this, because Levi, being a tax collector, had a lot of friends who were other tax collectors and sinners and doing wicked things in life. That brings us into the next part of this scripture, where it says, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples. So we've got Jesus, his disciples, as well as essentially the tax collectors and sinners, or hated people. They may or may not have been rich, or people of position. Who knows, really, who knows? Doesn't particularly tell us. Just saying they're sinners could be anyone. We're all sinners. Everyone. And even then, everyone was a sinner. So, but we'll have to take this as based on the fact that it's at Levi's house, and there were many tax collectors and sinners, and we're going to say they're likely people of position, and likely people that would socialize with tax collectors openly. Typically not be liked by the general population, middle class, we'll say it that way, of the time. So they were eating. He was with his disciples, and there were many who followed him. So a lot of other folks that followed him, whether they were in the house, outside the house, just kind of gathered around, sitting on the floor. You know, how big the house was. I'm guessing there wasn't a lot of, maybe there were a lot of seats or wasn't a lot of seats. I don't know, I'm just kind of visualizing this in my mind. You got a room, a large table, probably Jesus sitting somewhere here in the middle, tax collectors, sinners, you got Levi there, you got the other disciples there, then maybe a bunch of other people just sort of gathered around, standing by the wall, sitting on the floor, just really waiting and listening to what Jesus has to say. Kind of something like that. And we see in verse 16, when the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? So you have to look at this from the perspective of the time. Prior to Jesus was Old Testament methodologies, Old Testament views, where really the only way to get anywhere near God or to get in God's good graces were to do things by the Old Testament rules, which were to go through the Pharisees and go through the religious leaders and do the proper sacrifices, do the proper things, say the proper things, etc. And in this case, these were people who have not. They were as far from God as you can get. And the religious leaders of the time ask, why? Why is he with these people? And again, another testament to the question of who is Jesus. This right here frames up. Jesus did not come to save those that needed saved. He came here to save everyone, because all fall short. So it wasn't set at a bar that the Pharisees or the religious leaders of the time said, all right, these people are good, these people are bad, go from there. Jesus was there for everyone. Another truly amazing view of just who he was and what he was here to do. And verse 17. On hearing this, Jesus says to them, it is not the wealthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Not much I can add to that. Jesus says it all. He's not come to call the righteous, but sinners. He's come to save those that are lost. He's come for you and I. The best part about where we are in life and where we are in time on this earth is this is all done. Jesus has already done this. We're just learning at this point. He's already made the sacrifice to be our Savior. And all we have to do is accept it. Another truly amazing part of who is Jesus. He is our Savior. So, really, really good. Hope you enjoyed that. I know I did. Jesus calls Levi. So, Matthew he is from this point on another disciple of Jesus. So, I should probably keep a list where we're at. I think we're up to five disciples. I think he called 4 in chapter 1 and now 1 here. So I think we've got 5, maybe 4. Because if I look in the picture from the Bible Project, if you look at it over there, little boat, we got 4 people here. The word 5 or 4, and they just didn't get them all. I think we're, I want to say 5. But anyway, maybe one of the disciples wasn't in the boat. Maybe before we get to that point in chapter 4, he tells them to go do something else. Who knows? We're going to find out. In the meantime, let's jump back into gaming. Let's keep going. We are in verse 18.
Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. Some people came and asked Jesus, "How is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees are fasting, but yours are not?" Jesus answered, "How can the guests of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? They cannot, so long as they have him with them. But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and on that day they will fast. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. Otherwise the new piece will pull away from the old, making the tear worse. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise the wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins."
Okay, so let's pause it there and let's take a look at this section here fairly quickly. So this is Jesus' master storyteller. So as we continue this journey to answer the question of who is Jesus, this is yet another piece that we learn about him. Master storyteller, master of drawing the world around you and bringing it down to a level that you understand. So think of it in our perspective, he would use video game analogies or something else as a situation to explain what he's going through here. So the question here is for the really the context of what this is framing up that we see in verse 18, where it says, "Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting." So essentially, what is fasting? Well, fasting is a way of sacrifice, symbol of sacrifice. You're sacrificing something that you like to do. You like to. It could be food. It could be something. It could be an event. It could be an action. It could be activity. Really fasting. The point of fasting is so that it kind of is personal to you. You are giving up something that you enjoy, so that essentially you can become, and you spend the time that you would have essentially done said activity or ate or etc. To get closer to God, to pray, thank Him for what He does for you, and you seek for His guidance. And that's really the idea. Is you fast, you give up something, use that as an opportunity to get closer to God. That's what it's talking about here. So we're in a time period where John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. Now, when it says John's disciples, we're talking John the Baptist, okay? So we're talking this guy that we see over here that we learned about at the very beginning of the book of Mark. So that gentleman right there, the guy who wears camel's clothes, very rugged, etc. But he was a predominant religious figure for the movement of Christianity, for Jesus, because he was, after all, sent by God to be a witness of Jesus, or Jesus. So this man, of course, has gathered his own sort of following, all for Christ and what he's doing. And that's what we find here is, he's fasting, and the Pharisees are fasting because it's part of Old Testament biblical direction to fast. And then they come to Jesus and they say, how is it that John's disciples, John, you're, essentially your disciple, your follower, and his followers are fasting, but yet your disciples are not fasting? Essentially, Jesus's disciples, the ones that he's called, the ones that are with him at that particular time, John and his disciples are not with him. So that is the question. How is that okay? So again, they're trying to catch Jesus in a situation where they're just trying to get him to fall. They're trying to get him to mess up in his story, to say something wrong, to kind of backstep on a rule or something out of the Old Testament that they can use to call against him and kind of say, you see, this man is a fake, he's a fraud, and go that route. So that's what they're trying to go for here. This is a bit of a tough concept to kind of wrap your head around. And if you're listening to me, hey, it's only getting worse and you're only going to get more confused. But we'll do it together. Use each other. How about that? So let's jump into verse 19. Jesus answered, "How can the guests of the bridegroom fast while he is with them?" So it's an interesting it's analogy or story is not the words I'm wanting here. Another word I want, but I can't think of it. You think of a wedding, you think of the bridegroom and the groom itself, and it says, "How can the guests?" So essentially, at a wedding, you typically party, you share things. The bridegroom's there to be the host, if you will. So Jesus is basically calling that out and say, well, how can the guests fast while he is there? So if you're at a wedding and the bride and the groom, in this case the groom, everybody's celebrating, why wouldn't you celebrate with them? You're there, why not? That's what Jesus is saying, basically. They cannot, so long as they have him with them. So in other words, well, you're there, enjoy the time. That's what Jesus is saying, basically. I'm here. I am essentially the bridegroom, and the picture of Christianity and picture of how Jesus and the church is set up as Jesus is the bridegroom and the church is the bride, essentially. So it's kind of how that plays out. So you'll see that analogy where he calls himself the bridegroom. Um, all right, so verse 1. The time will come, the bridegroom will be taken from them, and on that day they will fast. So Jesus is basically saying, I'm here. As long as I'm here, my disciples don't have to fast because I'm right here. Whereas they're not going to get much closer to me than they are now. You know what I mean? They're right here. I'm here with them. I made this rule. You know what I mean? This rule is because I created it at the beginning of time. So as long as I'm here, they're good. They don't have to fast because they're already with me. They're as close as they're going to get. But there will come a time when I will be taking from them. So Jesus is already, this is one of the earlier predictions that we see where he's calling out the fact that he is going to die. He will go to the cross for us. He doesn't say that exactly here, but he's calling it out that there's going to come a time that he is going to be taken from them. And on that day, then they will resume the rule of fasting because he will no longer be with them. So, all right. And then verse 21, really, and 22 is just drawing more analogies to the situation, what we see here. So no one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, otherwise the new piece will pull away. Some kind of concept of clothing there. You don't patch something and then have the patch shrink or whatever, have the cloth shrink, and then the whole thing comes apart. Kind of pointless. Then verse 21, no one pours new wine into an old wineskin, otherwise the wine will burst the skins. So you think of wine skins back in the day were made of typically like I want to say an animal hide or other type of material that will, as it gets old, it dries, it gets real brittle. So when you pour new wine in it and it tries to expand the thing, it's going to break, it'll fall apart. And then essentially then it'll be ruined. Wine dumps all over the ground, and it ruins. So you get it. It's a weird concept to us these days because today, when you think wineskin, what you think of wine, you think of bottle. Okay, imagine taking a bottle of something and trying to refill it, but the bottle, the bottom of the bottle is broken out or whatever. You get the idea. It's just going to fall on the ground and be ruined. So this is essentially what Jesus is saying using these analogies. I'm here. Everything is okay right now. So when I leave, then will be the time for my disciples to fast. So really what we see here is just Jesus re-emphasizing that, yes, biblical rules are important, but he made them. So while he's there on earth, it's not necessary. Like it's my rule. I made the thing. I define the thing. I define how it works. So really, really interesting. We're going to get a lot of this kind of stuff as we continue to go through the book of Mark, where we see him using pictures and analogies. Some of it I understand, some of it I don't understand fully. I definitely could probably do some more studying in that, in just that one part. There's probably literally do an entire stream based on, just this fasting piece, just talking about fasting. But hey, we out here to have fun. We just learning some things about Jesus, because that's the name of the game. Play games, have fun, talk about Jesus. Look to answer the question in all ways: who is Jesus? So, really, really good. Probably not going to finish up the last part of this. We will start the next stream with Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath.